So Craig, we've talked last week a lot about how you can connect with people on more personal level, understanding them and their motivations. But then the next part is that that's not how we often communicate as leaders. Sometimes we're communicating to groups of leaders.
Mm.
And, off air you were talking about like how getting someone who might be a really good technical data person who really understands how to interpret and use data to make decisions might be really valuable in a team. But often, I guess the experience of a lot of people is that those people don't often communicate very well to a group or communicate sort of their findings clearly to the person they're trying to persuade, like the head coach or whatever. Why is that? Why are people so bad at, even when they're experts in something, so bad at kind of communicating that to others?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, we all have our strengths, don't we? And we all have areas that we want to improve on. And maybe that the person that is wonderful at analyzing analyzing the data is not the person to communicate the message. Maybe that's not it. And sometimes we are in a situation where the sports science person is working on the data and then they are poor at communicating it. And if they're the only person there, then we have to get better at doing that. So look, I think it gets back to Michael, if that's what you're asking, that, is ever that data analyst going to be great at presenting data? It mightn't be in their strengths that they actually have. But in saying that, so say if it is, and we want to work with that person, say if we wanted to work with that person, first thing I would be talking about is what we talked about previously, was empathy. Understand that you're giving this data to a coach that really is just seeing a whole bunch of numbers, but you have to take those numbers and create insight, create a story to then persuade in a certain situation. So numbers, I think sport is very confused with numbers, what they are. Numbers are a vehicle to create insight, to create a story. It's a story, okay, that we're trying to create. Numbers are just a vehicle. So we get so trendy about data. Most of the data that it's collected is not even used. So I think we're at a real tipping point in respect to that. And the other thing is, we're working with humans and human performance, and there's some things that algorithms and data will never tell us, and about human relationships and all that, and those key components that the algorithm isn't going to tell us. Yeah.
So on one hand, there's things about the data and the analysis that you just can't. There are some questions you just can't answer. But on the other hand, what you were saying is that even if you do have something interesting and important to say, that it takes empathy to say that well, because you have to appreciate what it might be like to a coach seeing a whole spreadsheet worth of numbers who hasn't been part of actually creating or organizing or synthesizing that. So they don't necessarily have either the background or the really deep understanding of the numbers that are in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, what's important, so that's a really critical thing to notice, I think, and maybe we can unpack that a little bit, is like, one is it takes quite a good amount of empathy to just remember what it's like on the other person receiving this information. But two is that the kind of maybe more critical role is to try to tie those numbers into telling a story, and that story is going to be more persuasive than the R squared of your predictive algorithm. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I am saying that. And the other step I will say is there's people watching, if there's students that are leaders or coaches. I think it's incompetent to outsource your insight and decision making to an analyst. So what do I mean by that? I mean, yes, you might have an analyst because they're skilled in the analysis of data. But then what I like to do is educate the coach or the leader what questions and what expectations they should be having from the data. I mean, we're in very shaky ground, and this happens nearly in every sport, that the analyst gives the insight. Hang on, the analyst could be completely wrong. They could be completely wrong, but do you know? If you're a leader now and you don't know, that's a problem. Once you start outsourcing the decision making to an analyst, and this could be if you're in a company to the financial analyst, or that, and you don't ask the questions, we've got major issues. But so many leaders are asleep at the data wheel.
That what you're saying there is you need to be able to be involved in that decision-making process, from asking the questions to sort of knowing how the data were kind of collected, because that will help you know how kind of faithful that is to help you make that decision. You can't outsource your decision-making. Like the role of the coach is to make the decisions. And yes, you need someone who can do the analysis and the data cleaning and all of the painful stuff around that. But ultimately that's part of your responsibility. But that's also because I think, you know, once you've made the decision, you're going to have to lead using that decision. I guess I want to make sure that we steer this a little bit more towards like how we do that, how we persuade people to sort of follow these decisions that maybe we've made. And you mentioned stories, which I think are often neglected, but really interesting thing to unpack. So like, how do good leaders use stories to try to communicate?
Well, because look, I mean, if we take a step back, if you're asking about persuasion, that's what you're speaking about. Persuasion is fascinating, and if you want to read a lot about persuasion, you know, you can go right back to Plato's times and how they used rhetoric and all those sort of areas are wonderful. One of the things that people make the mistake of is when they're trying to persuade people to go to a certain way, that it's outside someone's zone of, I suppose, acceptance. It's too far away from where they can cope with. The other thing is, often people in persuasion give a black or white, a yes or a no. And that's the first mistake you can make with persuasions, where if you give options to people, option 1, option 2, option 3, you've got much more chances to actually get a positive outcome if you're persuasion, what you're trying to do. So just think about it, Michael. If I give you trying to persuade you, and the answer is either yes or no, that's all you're thinking about in your head. Yes or no. If I then give you another option, I've now taken it away from yes, no, option 1. If I give you another option, option 2, now I've split your thinking, and now you're much more viable. It's much more viable for you to actually be persuaded in a way. So you've got to be very aware of what you're trying to do with your persuasion.
And what you're trying to say is that rather than just like getting binary, getting one, you know, yes or no, and like maybe an example to make it sort of more concrete, that's kind of create a story to help do this, is like, you know, you've got a player and you're deciding whether or not to drop them or keep them, right? And that is just very yes or no, right? And maybe you're using data to try to make that decision, and you're getting some input to say, you know, they're not performing, they've consistently underperformed. What you're saying is like the core principle here is that you want a good performing team, and maybe the two options aren't just like completely drop the player or to completely keep them in. Like, how can we try to improve parts of their performance? How can we give them less game time? How can we kind of move them to a position where they can optimize for their strengths? And what you're saying there is like not just having this like yes or no decision making for people. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, sometimes, I mean, coaches, I mean, and analysts just go down that confirmation bias sort of you know, area when they really just look for that data to drop the player.
Yeah.
You know, so if I'm leading, I would ask, well, give me options. You know, so then that's going to take away the bias of the analyst. I find analysts extremely biased.
Because they just look for the data that confirm what they were hoping to say.
Absolutely. And I think in sport also their understanding of data is sometimes limited. And I brought this up to an analyst the other day, that I was asked by a journalist, and I was quoted as saying, pre-COVID, post-COVID, this was in football and soccer, in the Australian Soccer League, the A-League, is the game faster? Well, you know, I have data, you know, physical data from a number of teams, and, you know, once I put it through a proper data analysis, it's not faster. Okay, so it's not faster. There's no significant difference. There's no, you know, even smallest worthwhile change. It's not. And then an analyst quoted numbers of passes, and I can't remember what they quoted, but I just looked at it and eyeballed it, and I said, "You're talking in absolutes. Do you know from your data what the typical error is of your data capture?" And they had zero understanding of what I was talking about. So this is the problem, that people quote data, do not understand data, and then also don't realize that you and I can go and have a hypothesis and make it work just because we want to. So I think we
Yeah.
need to be very, very aware of when we're working with data.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a great paper on football, which I should send you, Craig. That's called Many Analysts, One Data Set. They gave the same data set to 20 analysts.
Oh, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see it.
It was about whether there's a racial bias in refereeing, and the results were everywhere from there's like a hugely strong racial bias in referees to like there's an anti-bias where they're biased against the dominant culture, right? So like you end up with this massive spread, and it's great. And I guess so. Let me pivot the conversation a little bit, because there's one of the things, and forgive me if I've used this quote before, but that Mother Teresa and Stalin agreed on is that like one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. And, data points are often unpersuasive. They're used as a form of persuasion. But some people find that like hearing about individual stories to be quite compelling, and a more compelling way of motivating people. So if you're trying to lead like a cultural change, or I'm wondering whether you know of any leaders who have like used sort of persuasive strategies that aren't around data to try to move people along with them. Like what are some of the things that you think good leaders do when they're trying to inspire a group through, say, a speech that they do to try to pull people along with them?
Well, the first thing is they personalize it to the audience. Okay, so I think there's some good statistics on about when we talk is very, very powerful. Okay, so when we say you and then put that person in that situation, like an interesting one, it's a fascinating statistic that keeps resonating with me. That 250,000 Americans die every year from medical mistakes.
Yeah.
And when we compare that, 3,500 people died in the World Trade Center. 250,000 die every year, 3.5. That 3,500 people, that changed the course of the world, right? Because then we had the war on terror. But 250,000 people are dying every year. It's very hard to comprehend that. What does 250,000 people look like? So then if we can combine that with individual stories of people, and then putting that into the situation of, so people, the you in the audience, people can start to relate to that. Even I've seen people, what does 250,000 people look like? Okay, well that might look like a person from how long does that stretch out? So stories, visualization, so people can get a grasp of these statistics that are just too outrageous to even contemplate. But if we can put it in something so the audience can really embrace that, then we're going well. So it could be in respect to injury in sport. So I just had a team, recently finished up with the season, and it just had incredible injury statistics. It was, and that's always luck, and you hope your systems are working. But then if I can compare that, the best way for me to compare that is not number, is probably to compare that in monetary value. All right. So this is a saving of, $1.2 million of insurance money, or money sitting on the bench because they're injured, whatever it is. So you could put that into numbers. Percentages play well with people if the number is just too much. So if we were talking about 250,000 Americans dying of medical malpractice or medical mistakes, then what percentage of that is compared to, it sounds more powerful if I say, well, that's nearly 100 What is it, Michael?
Yeah, no, it's like 71 World Trade Centers, you know, or like, and you think about the sorts of things that happen, like then they're all tragedies, right? Like, but like the planes that go missing and 100 people lose their lives, and that's really sad. And there's 100 people who have families and loved ones and things like that. But like you said, there's the 250,000 people dying of medical mistakes. Like every one of those have families and loved ones and lose,
That's
and like
every year, and that's every year. Now, but then we take it because that's that's in the US, and now let's take it. How come we react so differently when there's been some environmental disaster in a third world country when it happens in a Western country?
yeah, this is what's really hard for a lot of people, is that there's no moral difference between the lives of someone who was, I don't know, say in New Orleans when there was a hurricane, was it Sandy, that killed lots of people and lots of people lost their
Yeah,
houses.
sure. Yeah.
Or even in Australia, we had a lot of cyclones and even like the bushfires, which are really sad, but they're nearby and they're present. And I think in the last year there were 100 people died in bushfires. But like like you said, there are floods in Bangladesh last year that might have made the news for a couple of days, and there were tens of thousands of people dying. And it's very different the way we emotionally react to that. I think the most difficult example of this for me to kind of resolve is there was a story, I think, a few years ago of a little girl who was, adorable 5-year-old. She fell in a well, and for 48 hours she was in a well, right? And like she had something like, I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think she had $80 million donated to her in the space of 48 hours because she was in a well and she needed some help to get out. But at the same time, like 500,000 kids died of malaria this year, and they died last year as well, and the year before, right? And like, there's no ethical difference between like an Ethiopian kid who's dying of a very preventable disease that we just don't even have in our country, and the life of a little girl who is adorable, but like that $80 million could have saved 100,000
And we're not
lives.
saying that's wrong. What we're saying is wrong is that we're not, there's that 500,000, like a life is a life, and and if that was our child in the well, we'd be
Totally.
absolutely the same. And I'm sure you're saying that what we're looking at is going, there's something wrong with the persuasion tactics of some of these. I mean, let's be honest, with some of these, world not-for-profits, because it's not resonating with us, because it's just too far. And we get back to persuasion; it's too far outside our zone of acceptance. We can't relate to it. So that's what we've got to do in our persuasion of coaches or of anyone that we're working with. Can you keep it in line? That it is acceptable. They can go this far, but if you take it out there, it's going to be zero. So small wins are often very powerful when you're in a persuasion, particularly in high performance sport. And I think persuasion is related to change management as well. But I think you need to be very clear, clear on what you're trying to persuade. And are you confident your persuasion is there for the right reasons, and that your persuasion, or the goal of your persuasion, is to have an impact for better?
This is where I think there's the really difficult tension for leaders, because we started this conversation talking about data and having a good understanding of data yourself and making sure that your data are answering the right questions for you, right? And I think what is hard for leaders to understand is that they should make their decisions on the basis of like strong rational thinking, good data, good science, good evidence. But then the way that we communicate and persuade that to others shouldn't be about data and numbers and that. And, it's almost like it's more persuasive. I mean, some of the things that you've talked about so far is like talking about, an individual person, talking about the influence it will have on you, talking to the athletes, making something concrete, making something really clear and persuasive in terms of a way that they can understand, rather than something sort of abstract, like, a big number like 250,000.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, we want to be making decisions about what we're prioritizing on the basis of of numbers and objective facts and science and reason. But on the other hand, we want to be persuading and communicating others on the basis of stories and emotions and concrete things that people can like, feel and touch and smell and make it much more real for them. Is that right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because and look, there's some really nice models of persuasion that I would encourage, and we might put on Leo for students. But and a lot of them about, first, you've got to gain people's attention. You've got to grab that attention before then you start to work with them to get them to this outcome. And I don't even think, I wonder how many people, even students, I didn't learn persuasion in my undergraduate anywhere in university.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we need to be, because that's about life, it's about communication. But there is definite ways to work and to develop your persuasion skills, and rather than just thinking you're going to have this data set, you're going to have this information that's just going to be taken up, and then it doesn't get taken up, and then you go, the coach is just old school, he doesn't understand, he's this, that, and that. No, you could not get your message across. It's your problem. And that's when I've reflected on my career where I've had problems and I haven't been able to get this information, which I know will make the coach better, will make the team better. If I haven't been able to get that message across, it's not their fault. It's my fault because I was not able to persuade.
Yeah, and that's a really much more healthy attribution to sort of say that, like, try to internalize that this is my job to try to, and you're not going to persuade everybody, but to try to do what we can to make this message clear and persuasive for someone else. And so in the time that we've got left, what do you feel are some of the most useful models of persuasion that you've encountered so far?
I think the one that I deal most with and that I focus on is Munro's. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. We'll put it in the notes, but it's really got a set thing, and I actually use it with writing, because remember, writing is persuasive as well. Like how people put out their argument when they write something, when they write an article. There is a method of really doing that, but it's really about identifying and grabbing someone's attention, really creating that narrative, and ending with a call to action. But you've got to take them on the journey. It's just not hit them. See, a lot of time people's persuasion technique is just hit them straight between the eyes and then go, oh, why hasn't that worked? Gets back to empathy. Think about where we're coming from, and let's keep it in the high performance sport thing, and we'll keep it with, head coach. You've got some information they don't want to see. I had this discussion with a friend of mine the other day about athlete monitoring. This is a coach I've worked for a number of years. Still, he'll say, okay, Craig, I don't know about it. I don't know. So I'm here going, okay, well, how do I deal? What I want to say, because he's a friend, is just stop talking, listen to me, and it will work. Because I've shown you over multiple years that it's worked. So I don't know why we have this discussion all the time. That's what I want to say. And I probably did say that at the start because he is a good friend. But what I've really got to do is go, okay, what is he saying here? Where is this coming from? Why is he actually saying it? And then I've got to work and to persuade him, because I know it will be better for him. That's my intention. It'll be better for him, better for his players, better overall if we do this. So I've got to empathize with him and then try and persuade him by using stories or using alternatives, that if we don't have it, put that there. What would it look like? What does it look like if we don't have the athlete monitoring? How do you see that being? And his answer was, I'd just look at them and I'd know if they were okay. I said, okay, so you've got 30 plus players in your squad. You're going to examine it. I'm just trying to work out how you're going to do that. How are you going to know about their sleep? How are you going to know about how they're coping? What are you going to know about their heart rate variability, blah, 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 by looking at them? that's a lot of players you've got to manage, where at the moment we have that data coming in. Of course, I agree with you that your eye as a coach is very, very powerful. But just imagine you've got this backup of data as well, just to confirm that you're right always.
It's very clever.
Now,
I like that.
but if we take it away, is it going to make life easier? And where is this coming from? And it was interesting. He said to me, like, during this bubble period, everyone's had to be monitored from a COVID perspective, coaches, staff, everything like that. He said, just drove me insane. You know, is it possible it could drive people psychologically insane, and it's going to be more stress and that sort of stuff? So what do I give him? Is the option, yes, you are going to monitor. No, you're not going to monitor. How about throwing another option? How about we don't do it every day? How about we look at, what do you think are critical days that we actually do this?
And you're showing that you're willing to like still achieve the purpose that he wants. You find the area where you both agree. You found the thing that you guys both agree on, which is that you need, like, some information will help calibrate his judgment. But how do we find something that suits both goals?
Yeah, and you know what, Michael? I was having this discussion, and I was just like, I wasn't like as calm as I was calm, because I was just like, holy hell, I've worked with you for 15 years. I've got multiple papers where showing how monitoring benefits you. You've been involved with multiple teams and that where it's benefited you. Oh, no. And I'm thinking, what? You know, and this is what I'm thinking, where I just want to go, bang, I'm not talking to you anymore. But we talked and tried to get to a better space. And I find those coaches really good for me. Because you know why? He's actually asking the questions. He's asking the why. And if I can't persuade that coach, then it's so easy to work with coaches that just listen to everything you say. I don't want to work with those coaches. I want the challenge. And this person is a constant challenge in my life. It's only going to make me better if you can look at it from that point of view. And I've got to empathize with him. Where's that coming from? You know, where's that coming from?
But you've tapped into, like, a lot, and this has been a bit of a whirlwind tour, but it sounds like what you're saying is if you can empathize with how someone feels about a situation, then you can actually use that emotion to try to help persuade them, right? Because you're almost using the emotion that is there and underlying this, or use the emotion that comes from a story, and that can help push them in the sort of direction that is with their best intention in mind.
You don't want to be a one-trick pony, you know? It's my way or the highway, because then you're just as bad as everyone else. And I think a lot of sports science and high-performance sport, it's filled with people that are my way or the highway. We don't want to be like that. And that might be one of my traits, but at least if I can recognize that, I've got to work with that and to be better. I think we need to be very clear. If we don't work on our persuasion, if we don't work on our empathy, I see the whole sports science, high performance sport area. I think thinking the value will dwindle away because people won't listen. Data without persuasion, sports science without persuasion, without empathy, what is it?
I mean, and I think sports psychology is a great example of this, where a lot of sports psychology has gone down this interesting scientific angle of looking at the different parts of your brain that might light up and how you can sort of activate different parts of the brain using, transmagnetic stimulation and that can, and all this sort of stuff. But if you're talking to an athlete or a coach, they don't understand what they mean by, nucleus accumbens activation around your amygdala. Like, it just does. And that's where, like, I think, sports psych is sort of threatened by these people who communicate more persuasively, but they're telling the wrong thing. And what you're saying is you need both. You need to be able to say, okay, I understand how the brain works so that I know the best strategies to use it. But when I'm communicating about a brain, I'm going to talk about my monkey mind versus my, my computer or my human, right? And that's what the British cycling team uses, that sort of metaphor of like the monkey. And that's much, much more persuasive than talking about the amygdala, even though they're really talking about the same thing, because the monkey is just much more concrete, emotive, simple explanation of the same idea. So
Yeah.
you're saying we all need to do that.
And I see what you're saying. You're saying the frustration in sports psychology is where sports psychology sits back and goes, what's these culture people, and what's these people, and what's these people? But how could they be getting it when that's our area? And what you're saying is, well, we have to look on our own self as a fraternity. And this is what I'm saying. I'm always going to look. I'm not going to work with someone. We work together, so I'm always going to go to someone that's educated, that has put the hard yards in, has put the time in, and is evidence-based. Okay. But we have to leave our ego at the door and go, you know what? This, coupled with marketing skills and persuasion skills and empathy, is going to get, what's the big problem with that? There is no problem with that if we're going to get the right people in. The other people that are like this is nutrition. I mean, nutrition, they worry that there's all these people, but how are you? I mean, they're probably a bigger worry because I think some of their science there's just problems with that. So, but again, we have to look within. We have to look within at our own fraternity and go, okay, why is our message not getting across? Why are they going outside to this? And because I suppose because I've studied psychology, I've been on meetings when this culture expert or these performance people, and I'm listening to these meetings and I'm looking at their qualifications and there is none. And then I'm actually listening to what they're saying. It makes no sense, like basically common sense, and it's not going to work. But the people are lapping it up. Why? Because they're better at persuasion.
Because it's simple, it's emotive, it's persuasive, there's stories of people's change, and
Well, let's look at, a lot of psychologists would be extremely anti a Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins did a week-long course in NPL what is it called? NLP, when he doesn't even mention it, but he's got no background at all. But rather than looking at him negatively, he's probably touched and impacted positively more lives than anyone could ever imagine. But really to look at that and go, hang on, what were we doing wrong that this could happen? Because obviously, that has a market. And then,
And I think what you're saying, and this is shared between sports science and leadership and sports psychology, is that, like, whether you like it or not, people are going to be using persuasive techniques to try to move others. And the difference is whether you're doing that with good faith and good science and you're using that for good, right? Or you might have people who are just doing it for their own reasons. They're trying to manipulate others for their own gain, or they're doing it naively because they don't have a good understanding of nutrition or psychology or sports science. And so I guess you can't just get frustrated at the way these charlatans are using persuasive stories to move people. Instead, you have to go, well, what can I learn from these people maybe who are persuasive and moving others, and how can I use it for good and good science to promote the right reason? And I think that shows how important not just having the science is, and not just having good reasons, and not just having good understanding, but actually being able to communicate it. It can be the master variable in your success. Tony Robbins, I actually think is really impressive, and he's got some very good models of the world. But like NLP as an idea, which seems to underlie some of his things, doesn't necessarily hold up to science. So he's very good, and a lot of the things that he says are right, and he makes a lot of people's lives better. But I guess he would be even better if he was basing a lot of his strategies within the good science. And I guess what we're both saying is that we can be more like Tony Robbins, and we can possibly be even better if we're basing what we're doing in kind of good evidence, but also adopting like excellent strategies for persuasion.
Absolutely. And that's what we need to embrace. And if we don't embrace that, then I think particularly in the sports science, high performance field, we're going to really struggle.